Welcome back to the channel. Today we drift into the fascinating world of the pastinto, an age of strict manners, unspoken rules, and a society where every detail of life was guided by expectation. We're stepping inside the Victorian era to explore what it truly felt like to live under its powerful social codes, where reputation meant everything, class shaped destiny, and even the smallest gesture carried meaning. If you enjoy immersive history that brings the past to life, make sure to like this video, share it with fellow history lovers, and subscribe to the channel for more journeys into the worlds that shaped our own. Now, let us step back in time. Imagine waking up in a world where the shape of your entire life has already been drawn for you, like ink set permanently into paper long before you ever opened your eyes. You do not wait to the question, "What will I become?" but rather to the expectation, "How well will I perform what I already am?" From the moment you rise, even before you speak your first words of the day, there are rules surrounding you, unwritten, unspoken, yet deeply understood by everyone around you. These rules are not posted on walls, nor enforced by guards, yet they are more powerful than laws. They live in glances, in gestures, in the silence between conversations. They determine how you dress, how you walk, how loudly you may laugh, and even what you are allowed to hope for. The morning begins with ritual. Clothing is not chosen merely for comfort or preference, it is selected as a declaration of place. Fabric, color, and condition speak louder than any introduction. A well-tailored coat or carefully maintained dress signals belonging to a world of order and means, while worn sleeves or ill-fitting garments quietly betray struggle. People learn to read these signs instantly. Before a single word is exchanged, judgments have already formed. Society functions like an enormous stage, and every individual is both actor and audience, constantly performing and constantly observing. The streets themselves reflect this invisible structure. Carriages roll past rows of neat homes, their windows polished, their curtains arranged just so, projecting dignity and discipline to the outside world. A few roads away, narrow alleys pressed together, crowded with lives lived far more closely, yet even there the same expectations persist. Cleanliness is pursued, not merely for hygiene, but because disorder suggests moral failure. Respectability is treated almost like a form of currency, something to be earned, protected, and never squandered. Conversation is careful. People choose their words with precision, avoiding subjects that might seem improper or too emotional. Public restraint is considered a mark of strength. To reveal too much feeling is to risk appearing uncontrolled, and self-control is admired above nearly all else. A person must demonstrate composure, reliability, and adherence to accepted values at all times. Even joy is moderated, expressed politely rather than exuberantly, as though enthusiasm itself must remain within boundaries. In such a world, reputation becomes one of the most valuable possessions a person can hold. It is fragile, yet it defines everything. Families guard their reputations fiercely, passing them down like heirlooms. A good name can open doors, create opportunities, and ensure acceptance in social circles. A damaged one, however, can close those same doors permanently. Stories circulate quickly, and gossip, though often denied, acts as an invisible enforcement mechanism. The fear of being talked about, judged, or misunderstood encourages constant vigilance. Daily routines reinforce these expectations. Meals are not simply eaten, they are conducted with attention to manners, posture, and conversation. Letters are written with formal phrasing, reflecting education and propriety rather than spontaneity. Visits are scheduled and structured, governed by rules about timing, introductions, and duration. Even leisure is organized in a way that reflects discipline. The goal is not merely to live, but to live correctly. From childhood, individuals are taught that behavior reflects character, and character reflects destiny. Instruction focuses not only on knowledge but on forming habits of obedience, modesty, and diligence. Young people grow up internalizing the idea that their worth is measured by how well they align with expectations. Imagination may be encouraged in private, yet in public it must never disrupt order. Dreams are shaped carefully, trimmed so they fit within the boundaries already established. Time itself seems regulated by this rhythm of predictability. Each hour carries its purpose: work, study, calling hours, meals, prayer, rest, forming a structured pattern that offers both stability and constraint. Many find comfort in this regularity. The certainty of knowing what is expected provides a sense of security, a feeling that the world is understandable and controlled. Yet this same certainty can also feel suffocating, leaving little space for individuality to breathe. Religion and morality are woven deeply into everyday life. reinforcing the belief that order reflects a higher design. Hard work is praised not only as practical but as virtuous. Modesty is considered not just polite but righteous. Suffering, when it occurs, is often interpreted as a test of character rather than a failure of the system. These interpretations strengthen the existing structure, encouraging people to accept their conditions rather than challenge them. Public spaces mirror this sense of discipline. Parks are arranged landscapes rather than wild nature, shaped to appear orderly and serene. Buildings emphasize symmetry and permanence, suggesting stability and endurance. Everything communicates the same message: society is strongest when it is controlled, measured, and predictable. Spontaneity is treated with suspicion, as though unpredictability might unravel the delicate balance holding everything together. Yet beneath this polished surface, individuals experience a wide range of emotions: ambition, frustration, pride, longing, all carefully concealed behind practiced expressions. A person may feel immense pressure to succeed according to society's standards, while privately wondering whether those standards leave room for true fulfillment. Another may take pride in meeting expectations, finding identity in belonging to something larger and enduring. These inner lives remain largely hidden, expressed only in diaries, private letters, or quiet moments of reflection. Community plays an essential role in maintaining the system. Neighbors observe one another, offering assistance when needed but also ensuring that norms are followed. Approval is shown through invitations, visits, and inclusion in social gatherings. Disapproval may appear as distance, silence, or exclusion. Rarely is confrontation direct; instead, subtle signals communicate whether one is aligned with the collective values. This indirect enforcement allows the structure to persist without obvious coercion. Technology and industry begin to transform the physical world during this time, introducing new machines, faster transportation, and expanding cities. These changes bring excitement and possibility, yet social expectations remain remarkably steady. Innovation is welcomed when it improves productivity or comfort, but not when it threatens established hierarchies. Progress is encouraged, provided it does not disturb the moral framework believed to sustain civilization itself. Work, regardless of occupation, is approached with seriousness and discipline. Punctuality, reliability, and endurance are celebrated traits. Idleness is condemned, seen as both wasteful and morally suspect. People define themselves largely through their duties, and fulfillment is often described in terms of usefulness rather than personal satisfaction. This mindset shapes not only economic life, but also personal identity, encouraging individuals to see themselves as contributors to a grand, ordered system. Social gatherings illustrate the era's delicate balance between connection and constraint. Dinners, teas, and formal visits allow relationships to develop, yet they unfold within clearly defined guidelines. Seating arrangements, topics of discussion, and even the sequence of courses follow tradition. Participants navigate these occasions carefully, aware that each action contributes to how they will be perceived. Success lies in appearing natural while adhering to rules that are anything but spontaneous. For many, this world offers a sense of pride. It is an age that values refinement, self-discipline, and aspiration toward improvement. People believe they are part of a civilization striving toward greatness, building institutions, expanding knowledge, and shaping a legacy that will endure. The emphasis on character and responsibility fosters resilience and dedication. Individuals often feel they are participating in something meaningful and historically significant. At the same time, the rigidity of expectations can create quiet tensions. Personal desires must often be negotiated against public duty. Choices about career, marriage, or lifestyle are rarely made in isolation; they are weighed against family reputation and societal approval. The individual learns to balance authenticity with conformity, crafting a version of self that fits within acceptable boundaries while attempting to retain some inner truth. Communication itself reflects this balance. Written correspondence becomes an art form filled with elaborate courtesy and careful expression. Letters provide a space where emotion can be conveyed more freely, yet even their language remains polished and restrained. Through these exchanges, relationships deepen while still honoring the era's emphasis on decorum. As evening falls, households gather in lamplight, engaging in reading, conversation, or quiet entertainment. These moments feel intimate, sheltered from the scrutiny of the outside world, yet they are still shaped by the same values of propriety and self-improvement. Activities are chosen not merely for pleasure, but for their perceived moral or educational benefit. Leisure is expected to refine the mind rather than simply amuse it. The day ends much as it began, with reflection on duty fulfilled and expectations met. People measure themselves against the standards they have been taught since childhood, finding satisfaction in compliance or anxiety in perceived shortcomings. Sleep arrives not only as rest, but as preparation to resume the performance again the next morning. To live within this system is to inhabit a paradox. It offers structure, clarity, and a shared understanding of purpose, yet it also limits spontaneity and personal freedom. It creates communities bound by common values, while quietly discouraging deviation from those values. It celebrates progress, yet insists that progress must never undermine tradition. This world does not feel oppressive in an obvious sense. There are no chains, no proclamations of restriction. Instead, it operates through consensus, habit, and belief. People participate willingly because they have been taught that these rules represent morality, stability, and even civilization itself. The boundaries are internalized so deeply that they rarely appear as boundaries at all. And so life continues in this carefully ordered rhythm, a society built on the conviction that harmony depends on everyone knowing their place and playing their part with precision. Each day reinforces the same message, that dignity lies in restraint, that success lies in conformity, and that the strength of the whole depends upon the discipline of the individual. Beneath the elegance and certainty, however, the quiet complexity of human experience persists, ambition stirring, doubts forming, and the timeless desire for self-expression waiting patiently behind the curtain of respectability. To understand the Victorian world, one must first understand that society was not simply divided, it was carefully layered, like a structure built of stone where each level supported the one above it and pressed down upon the one below. People did not merely belong to different economic groups. They occupied positions in a hierarchy that was believed to be natural, permanent, and morally justified. During the era of Queen Victoria this hierarchy shaped nearly every human interaction, from the grandest political decision to the smallest gesture exchanged on a street corner. Class was not something a person achieved. It was something a person inherited, carried from birth like a family name, visible in posture, speech, and expectation. The moment a child entered the world, that child's future was already framed by invisible boundaries. Education, occupation, marriage prospects, friendships, and even leisure were filtered through the question of class. Society did not ask, what can this individual become, but rather, what is appropriate for someone of this station? The upper class stood at the top of this carefully ordered world, composed largely of aristocratic families whose wealth came from land ownership, inheritance, and long-established privilege. Their authority was not only economic but cultural. They were seen as the custodians of tradition, refinement, and leadership. Their homes were symbols of permanence, filled with portraits of ancestors and reminders of lineage stretching back generations. For them, class was inseparable from identity. To belong to the upper class was to carry history itself as part of one's daily existence. Yet their lives were not free from expectation. Aristocrats were required to embody dignity and responsibility, to manage estates, host social functions, and maintain standards that reinforced their legitimacy. Their behavior was scrutinized as closely as that of any other group, because they represented what society believed it should aspire to. Leisure existed certainly, but even leisure followed rule-structured visits, formal dinners, seasonal travel, all conducted within a framework of etiquette designed to preserve hierarchy. Below them, the middle class expanded rapidly during the 19th century, fueled by industrialization, commerce, and professional occupations. This group included merchants, lawyers, doctors, teachers, and administrators, people whose livelihoods depended not on inherited land but on education, discipline, and ambition. The middle class occupied a unique and often anxious position. They had achieved economic stability, yet they constantly sought validation from those above them while distinguishing themselves from those below. Respectability became their defining ideal. They invested enormous effort into demonstrating moral character, proper conduct, and domestic order. Homes were arranged to display cleanliness and control. Children were educated with an emphasis on discipline, and public behavior was carefully managed. For the middle class, class identity was something to protect and perform. Advancement was possible, but it required relentless attention to appearance, manners, and reputation. Success could elevate a family's standing, but any hint of scandal could undo years of careful progress. This created a culture of striving and ongoing attempt to secure one's place in a system that offered opportunity but demanded conformity in exchange. Middle-class individuals often felt caught between aspiration and fear, aspiration to rise, fear of falling. Their lives were shaped by schedules, self-improvement, and adherence to values that emphasized hard work and restraint as both practical necessities and moral virtues. At the base of the social structure lived the working class, a vast and diverse population whose labor powered the factories, workshops, and households of the age. Their lives were defined by effort and endurance. Unlike the middle class, they had little opportunity to transform their position, and unlike the upper class, they had few resources to shield them from hardship. Work was not a pathway to identity, it was survival itself. Despite this, working-class communities developed strong internal bonds. Families relied on one another, neighbors shared burdens, and traditions of mutual aid created resilience within difficult conditions. Their culture was rich in its own forms of expression, though it was often overlooked or misunderstood by those above them. The larger society tended to interpret poverty as a moral failing rather than a structural reality, reinforcing the belief that class divisions reflected character as much as circumstance. What made Victorian class structure particularly powerful was its visibility. One could often determine another person's place instantly through subtle cues. The cut of clothing, the cleanliness of hands, the style of speech, even body language. These markers functioned like a language everyone understood. A refined accent suggested education and status, a regional dialect might invite dismissal or prejudice. Social boundaries were maintained not only by wealth but by perception, reinforced every time individuals interacted. Movement between classes did occur, but it was rare enough to be remarkable. Stories of individuals rising through talent or fortune captured public imagination precisely because they defied the norm. Such cases were treated as exceptions that proved the rule, celebrated without fundamentally challenging the system itself. For most people, life unfolded within the boundaries into which they had been born, and expectations encouraged acceptance rather than rebellion. Marriage, too, was shaped by class considerations. Romantic affection was often secondary to compatibility of status, reputation, and economic stability. Families evaluated potential matches not only for personal qualities, but for how well they aligned with social expectations. A marriage that crossed class lines could provoke concern or even ostracism, as though it threatened the delicate balance of the hierarchy. Education reflected these divisions as well. Upper-class education emphasized tradition, leadership, and cultural knowledge. Middle-class schooling focused on discipline and practical skills suited to professional life. Working-class children, when they received education at all, were often taught only the basics considered necessary for labor. The structure of learning itself reinforced the roles society expected individuals to play. Public spaces mirrored this layered arrangement. Certain districts, institutions, and activities catered to specific classes, subtly discouraging mingling. Even forms of entertainment differ at what one group considered appropriate recreation might seem inaccessible or improper to another. These separations maintained order while limiting shared experience, ensuring that individuals lived largely among those of similar standing. Underlying all of this was a widely accepted belief that hierarchy was essential to stability. Many Victorians viewed class distinctions not as injustice but as organization, a system that allowed society to function efficiently. Each group had duties, and fulfilling those duties contributed to what was seen as collective progress. Questioning the structure risked appearing ungrateful or disruptive, so change came slowly, often framed as reform rather than transformation. Yet tension always existed beneath the surface. Industrial growth created new wealth that did not always align neatly with traditional rankings. Some families rose economically but struggled for social recognition, while older elites sometimes relied on prestige more than prosperity. These shifts introduced subtle uncertainties into a system that prided itself on permanence, revealing that even the most rigid hierarchies must adapt to changing realities. For individuals living within this framework, class was both guide and limitation. It provided identity, community, and a sense of belonging, yet it also narrowed the horizon of possibility. People learned to measure themselves according to standards they did not create, navigating a world where acceptance depended on how convincingly they fulfilled the role assigned to them. In this way, Victorian society functioned like an intricate machine, each part carefully positioned, each movement reinforcing the overall design. The structure endured not simply because it was enforced, but because it was believed and woven into habits, institutions, and values so deeply that it felt inevitable. To live within it was to experience both certainty and constraint, knowing exactly where one stood while rarely being invited to stand anywhere else. In Victorian society, few ideas carried more weight than the concept of respectability. It was not simply a matter of behaving well or following laws, it was an all-encompassing standard that shaped how individuals understood themselves and judged others. Respectability functioned as a kind of social compass, pointing toward what was considered proper, moral, and acceptable. To possess it was to be trusted and included. To lose it was to risk exclusion from the very fabric of society. This value was reinforced throughout the long reign of Queen Victoria whose public image of discipline, family devotion, and moral seriousness became a symbolic model for the age. Her example was widely admired and imitated, encouraging ordinary people to see personal conduct as a reflection of national character. In this way, private behavior took on public significance. Every household, no matter how modest, was expected to mirror the ideals of order, restraint, and virtue. Respectability began with appearance, because appearance was believed to reveal inner character. Clothing needed to be clean, modest, and appropriate to one's station. Even when finances were strained, families would go to great lengths to present themselves neatly. A polished pair of shoes or a carefully mended coat signaled diligence and pride. Disorder, by contrast, suggested laziness or moral weakness. People learned to interpret such signals instinctively, making judgments based on what they saw before they heard a single word spoken. Homes, too, became expressions of moral identity. The Victorian household was imagined as a sanctuary of order, a controlled environment set apart from the unpredictability of the outside world. Furniture was arranged carefully, ornaments displayed thoughtfully, and routines followed consistently. Cleanliness carried symbolic meaning, representing discipline and self-respect rather than mere practicality. A well-kept home demonstrated that its inhabitants possessed not only good taste, but also upright character. This attention to presentation extended into daily habits. Mealtimes followed patterns of politeness and restraint. Speech was measured, avoiding vulgarity or excessive emotion. Visitors were received with courtesy governed by established conventions. These rituals may appear small, but together they formed a powerful system of self-regulation. By practicing them repeatedly, individuals internalized the belief that morality could be demonstrated through behavior as much as through belief. Reputation stood at the center of this system. It was considered one of the most valuable assets a person or family could possess, more enduring than money and more fragile than glass. A good reputation opened opportunities, fostered trust, and secured social acceptance. A damaged one could isolate an individual almost instantly. Because communities were tightly interconnected, news of misconduct traveled quickly, often magnified by rumor. The fear of such scrutiny encouraged constant vigilance over one's actions. The pressure to maintain respectability affected every level of society, though it was perhaps most intensely felt among the growing middle class. For them, respectability was both aspiration and defense. It allowed families to distinguish themselves from poverty while seeking recognition from those of higher rank. As a result, they invested tremendous effort into demonstrating propriety, educating their children carefully, managing finances prudently, and ensuring that public behavior aligned with accepted norms. Emotion itself became subject to regulation. Victorian culture valued self-control, interpreting it as evidence of strength and maturity. Displays of anger, grief, or excitement were expected to be moderated, expressed in ways that did not disturb social harmony. This did not mean people felt less deeply, but they learned to channel feelings into acceptable forms. Letters, literature, and private reflection often carried emotions that could not be openly displayed. Moral responsibility was framed as a personal duty rather than a collective issue. Individuals were encouraged to cultivate habits of hard work, punctuality, and sobriety, believing that these qualities determined both success and virtue. Poverty was frequently explained as the result of moral failing rather than structural inequality, reinforcing the idea that respectability was accessible to anyone willing to practice discipline. This belief strengthened the existing social order by placing emphasis on individual behavior instead of systemic change. Religion played a reinforcing role, offering ethical language that aligned closely with social expectations. Sermons emphasized diligence, modesty, and duty, presenting them as spiritual obligations. Attending services, observing religious customs, and demonstrating charitable concern for others all became markers of uprightness. Faith and respectability intertwined so completely that they were often indistinguishable in daily life. Gender roles were deeply connected to these ideals. Men were expected to embody responsibility, rationality, and authority, proving their worth through steady work and moral leadership within the family. Women were viewed as guardians of the domestic sphere, responsible for creating an environment of purity, comfort, and ethical guidance. The home was imagined as a moral center, and women's conduct within it was seen as shaping the character of future generations. Social interactions functioned as ongoing assessments of respectability. Invitations, visits, and introductions were not merely friendly gestures but acknowledgments of status and trustworthiness. To be welcomed into someone's home signaled approval. To be excluded could indicate quiet disapproval. In this way, communities collectively enforced standards without formal authority. Approval was granted socially, not legally. Leisure activities were also shaped by the desire to appear respectable. Reading, music, and educational pursuits were encouraged because they cultivated refinement. Even recreation was expected to contribute to self-improvement. Pastimes considered idle or excessive were discouraged as they suggested a lack of discipline. The ideal individual used free time wisely, demonstrating balance and purpose. This emphasis created a culture of performance, though it was rarely described that way by those living within it. People did not think of themselves as acting, they believed they were expressing their true selves. Yet the constant awareness of observation influenced behavior in subtle ways. Individuals adjusted speech, posture, and choices to align with expectations, sometimes suppressing personal inclinations that might invite criticism. The result was a society that prized predictability. When everyone followed similar codes of conduct, interactions became orderly and comprehensible. There was comfort in knowing how others would behave and what responses were appropriate. At the same time, this predictability left little room for divergence. Those who challenged norms risked being labeled improper or even dangerous to social stability. Children absorbed these lessons from an early age. Instruction focused not only on academic knowledge but on forming habits of obedience, neatness, and politeness. Stories, advice manuals, and educational materials emphasized character building above all else. Young people grew up understanding that success meant aligning personal desires with social approval, learning to monitor themselves long before others needed to intervene. Yet beneath the emphasis on uniformity, individuals found subtle ways to express uniqueness. Personal tastes appeared in decoration, hobbies, or intellectual interests, provided they did not disrupt outward conformity. Creativity existed, but it was carefully framed within acceptable limits. This balance allowed for individuality without threatening the shared moral structure. Over time, respectability became both a unifying force and a source of tension. It connected people through shared values, creating a sense of belonging and mutual understanding. At the same time, it demanded continuous effort to maintain appearances, sometimes creating anxiety about falling short. The line between genuine virtue and social performance could blur, leaving individuals to wonder whether they were living authentically or merely correctly. In this environment, life unfolded as a constant negotiation between inner feeling and outward expression. People sought to believe that the two were aligned, that by behaving properly they were also becoming morally better. Whether or not that belief always held true, it shaped the rhythms of daily existence, guiding choices large and small. Respectability, therefore, was not just an abstract ideal. It was the invisible architecture of Victorian life, structuring relationships, ambitions, and self-perception. It governed how people presented themselves to the world and how they interpreted the actions of others. Through countless routines and expectations, it defined what it meant to live honorably, leaving a legacy that would influence social values long after the era itself had passed. As the 19th century advanced, the physical landscape of Britain began to transform with astonishing speed. Fields that had once stretched quietly across the countryside gave way to railways, warehouses, and towering factory buildings. Smoke rose in thick columns above expanding cities, signaling not only industrial activity but the arrival of a new rhythm of life, faster, louder, and more demanding than anything that had come before. This transformation was particularly visible in places like London, which grew into a vast urban center where innovation and hardship existed side by side. Industrialization promised progress. Machines increased productivity, goods became more widely available, and transportation networks connected regions that had once felt distant. Railways allowed people and materials to move at unprecedented speed, shrinking the sense of space and time. Markets expanded, businesses flourished, and Britain's influence stretched across the British Empire, linking distant territories through trade and administration. To many observers, it seemed like an age of unstoppable advancement, proof that human ingenuity could reshape the world. Yet this progress came with profound social consequences. The same factories that symbolized innovation also demanded relentless labor. Workers often spent long hours operating heavy machinery in environments filled with noise, heat, and dust. Safety measures were minimal by modern standards, and injuries were common. The drive for efficiency meant that human effort was treated as another component of production, measured and regulated according to the needs of industry rather than the well-being of individuals. Urban growth happened so rapidly that infrastructure struggled to keep pace. Entire neighborhoods emerged almost overnight, crowded with families seeking employment opportunities. Housing was often hastily constructed and densely packed, leaving little space for privacy or comfort. Narrow streets teemed with activity, reflecting both the energy of economic expansion and the strain placed upon those living within it. The closeness of urban life fostered community but also exposed residents to unsanitary conditions and limited resources. For many working families, daily existence revolved around the factory clock. Time itself became mechanized, divided into shifts, and measured by whistles signaling the start and end of labor. This represented a dramatic change from earlier ways of life, where work had often followed seasonal or agricultural patterns. Now, routine was dictated by machines, and punctuality became an essential virtue. Missing a shift could mean losing wages, and lost wages threatened survival. Industrial employment reshaped family dynamics as well. In numerous households, multiple members contributed to the family income. The economic structure left little room for idleness, and cooperation within families became essential to managing long hours and limited earnings. Despite hardships, many families developed resilience and solidarity, supporting one another through shared responsibility. The presence of industry influenced not only economics but also the environment. Coal-powered machinery filled the air with soot, coating buildings and clothing alike. Rivers that once ran clear were increasingly used to dispose of waste from manufacturing processes. These changes were accepted as part of progress, though they altered daily life in visible and sometimes troubling ways. People adapted, learning to navigate a world where signs of industrial activity were constant companions. At the same time, technological innovation inspired a sense of wonder. New inventions captured public imagination, demonstrating possibilities that earlier generations could scarcely have imagined. Rail travel, for instance, allowed journeys that once required days to be completed in hours. The ability to move quickly across long distances reshaped perceptions of geography, commerce, and even leisure. For some, these advancements symbolized opportunity and excitement, suggesting that the future held limitless potential. Economic expansion created wealth, but that wealth was unevenly distributed. Industrial success enriched entrepreneurs, investors, and manufacturers who capitalized on new technologies. Their achievements reinforced the belief that determination and enterprise could yield remarkable rewards. Yet the workers who sustained production often saw only modest improvements in their own conditions, highlighting disparities that became increasingly visible as cities grew. Public awareness of these contrasts gradually increased. Observers documented the realities of industrial life, drawing attention to both its achievements and its challenges. Reform movements began to emerge, advocating for better working conditions, education, and public health measures. These efforts reflected a growing recognition that progress required not only technological advancement, but also social responsibility. Urban centers became places of remarkable diversity, bringing together people from different regions, trades, and cultural backgrounds. This mixing created vibrant communities, where ideas and traditions intersected in new ways. Markets, streets, and workplaces buzzed with interaction, generating both collaboration and tension. The density of city life meant that experiences were shared more intensely, whether joyful or difficult. Despite hardships, many individuals took pride in contributing to what they saw as a transformative age. Industrial labor was often framed as participation in national achievement, a collective effort that strengthened Britain's position in the world. This sense of purpose helped sustain morale, even when conditions were demanding. The narrative of progress encouraged people to believe that their work, however strenuous, played a role in building something enduring. Education and skill development slowly gained attention as industry evolved. Certain occupations required specialized knowledge, leading to the establishment of training programs and institutions aimed at preparing workers for technical roles. These developments hinted at the possibility of gradual change within the rigid social structure, offering limited but meaningful opportunities for advancement. Transportation networks further altered patterns of daily life. Goods produced in factories could be distributed widely, reaching markets that had once relied on local production. This increased availability changed consumption habits, introducing a broader range of items into ordinary households. The presence of manufactured goods became a visible sign of industrial influence, integrating global trade into everyday routines. Even leisure was touched by industrialization. As cities expanded, new forms of entertainment and recreation appeared, shaped by urban culture and technological innovation. Public parks, exhibitions, and organized events offered moments of respite from the intensity of work, allowing people to gather and share experiences outside the workplace. These activities reflected an evolving understanding of balance between labor and rest. The contrast between innovation and hardship defined much of this era's character. On one hand, the 19th century witnessed remarkable achievements in engineering, communication, and production. On the other, it confronted society with questions about fairness, health, and the human cost of rapid change. This duality created a complex legacy, one in which admiration for progress coexisted with concern for those most affected by its demands. As industrialization continued to shape the landscape, it also influenced how people understood time, space, and possibility. The speed of change encouraged optimism about the future, yet it also required adaptation to new forms of discipline and organization. Life became more structured, more connected, and in many ways more challenging, as individuals adjusted to the expectations of an industrial society. In this evolving environment, the Victorian world revealed its capacity for both transformation and continuity. Technological breakthroughs altered the material conditions of life, while social values emphasized stability and order. In Victorian society, expectations did not begin in adulthood, they were instilled from the earliest moments of childhood, shaping individuals long before they could fully understand the rules they were being asked to follow. A child was not seen simply as a young person discovering the world, but as a future adult in training, someone who needed to be molded carefully to fit the social order. From the nursery onward, lessons in obedience, discipline, and propriety were considered just as important as learning to read or write. Behavior was corrected swiftly, habits were monitored closely, and respect for authority was emphasized as the foundation of character. For many children, especially those in working families, life moved quickly from innocence into responsibility. Play existed, but it was often brief and overshadowed by the expectation that every member of a household would contribute in some way. Young boys and girls learned practical tasks early, assisting parents or entering employment at ages that today would seem astonishingly young. Society justified this by viewing work not as exploitation but as preparation, a means of teaching resilience and moral strength. Industry and duty were praised as virtues, even when they weighed heavily on small shoulders. Education, where available, reinforced the same ideals. Schools stressed punctuality, neatness, and respect as much as intellectual achievement. Students sat in orderly rows, reciting lessons designed to instill both knowledge and discipline. The purpose of learning was not merely to expand the mind, but to create reliable, upright citizens who understood their place in the world. Stories and textbooks emphasized moral examples, presenting diligence and humility as the keys to a successful life. Literature of the time captured and sometimes questioned these realities. Writers such as Charles Dickens portrayed children navigating hardship and expectation, revealing both the strength and vulnerability of youth shaped by rigid systems. In works like Oliver Twist, readers encountered characters whose lives were marked by labor, authority, and the search for kindness within a demanding environment. These narratives resonated deeply because they reflected experiences familiar to many families, even when softened by fiction. Alongside expectations placed upon children came equally powerful rules governing gender. Victorian culture defined masculinity and femininity with remarkable precision, assigning each its own duties, virtues, and limitations. These roles were presented not as social constructs but as natural truths, believed to reflect an unchangeable order. From an early age, boys and girls were guided toward behaviors that aligned with these ideals, preparing them to assume their respective responsibilities as adults. Boys were encouraged to develop qualities associated with strength and independence. They were taught to value rational thinking, perseverance, and self-control. Education often emphasized subjects considered practical or intellectually rigorous, reinforcing the belief that men would enter professions, manage finances, and participate in public life. Emotional restraint was praised, and displays of vulnerability were often discouraged, as they were thought to undermine authority or resolve. Girls, by contrast, were guided toward skills associated with the domestic sphere. Instruction focused on manners, household management, and social grace, preparing them for roles centered on family and home. Sewing, music, and polite conversation were valued accomplishments, not merely as hobbies but as evidence of refinement and suitability for marriage. The ideal woman was imagined as nurturing, modest, and morally influential, someone who would create an environment of harmony and guide the ethical development of her children. These distinctions shaped nearly every aspect of daily life. Clothing itself reinforced gender expectations, with garments designed not only to signify identity but to regulate movement and behavior. Activities considered appropriate for one gender might be discouraged for the other, ensuring that differences remained visible and consistent. Society celebrated this separation, believing it maintained balance and stability. Marriage stood at the center of these gendered expectations. It was regarded as both a personal union and a social institution, one that ensured continuity of values across generations. For women especially, marriage often defined adulthood, marking the transition from daughter to wife and mother. The household became the stage upon which ideals of care, order, and respectability were enacted. Men, meanwhile, were expected to provide financially and represent the family in the wider world, carrying responsibilities that linked domestic life to economic and social structures. Despite these clearly drawn roles, individuals navigated them with varying degrees of comfort and constraint. Some found fulfillment in meeting expectations, taking pride in contributing to family and community according to established patterns. Others experienced tension between personal aspirations and societal limits, sensing possibilities beyond what tradition allowed. Such feelings were rarely expressed openly, yet they existed quietly within many lives. The family unit functioned as the primary place where these values were transmitted and reinforced. Parents served as both caregivers and instructors, modeling behavior they hoped their children would emulate. Daily routines, meals, chores, lessons, and prayers created rhythms that blended affection with discipline. Love was present, but it was often expressed through guidance and correction rather than overt display, reflecting the era's emphasis on restraint. Community institutions supported this structure by echoing the same messages. Churches, schools, and workplaces all promoted ideals of duty, modesty, and perseverance. Together they formed a network of influence that shaped identity at every stage of life. Because these values appeared consistently across environments, they were rarely questioned. They seemed simply to be the way the world worked. Yet within this framework, small acts of individuality still emerged. Children formed friendships, imagined adventures, and found moments of play even amid responsibility. Women created spaces of creativity through writing, art, or conversation, expressing themselves within socially acceptable boundaries. Men, too, sought personal satisfaction through intellectual pursuits or community involvement beyond their occupations. These experiences added depth to lives often described only in terms of obligation. As the 19th century progressed, gradual changes began to appear. Expanding access to education and shifting economic conditions opened limited opportunities for reconsidering established roles. Discussions about reform, fairness, and personal development gained attention, suggesting that tradition and adaptation might coexist. While the fundamental structure remained intact, subtle shifts hinted at the transformations that would follow in later generations. Living within this system meant growing up with a clear sense of direction, but also with boundaries that could feel immovable. Childhood prepared individuals not only for adulthood, but for a specific kind of adulthood, one defined by duty and conformity. Gender roles offered identity and purpose, while also narrowing the range of acceptable choices. Together, these forces shaped a society that valued stability above all, seeking continuity through carefully guided lives. The result was a culture in which personal development and social expectation were tightly intertwined. From the earliest lessons of childhood to the responsibilities of maturity, individuals were taught to see themselves as part of a larger design, their actions contributing to the maintenance of order and tradition. Within that design, they forged relationships, built families, and navigated hopes and limitations alike, leaving behind a legacy that continues to influence how later generations understand childhood, gender, and the meaning of responsibility itself. As the Victorian age moved toward its later decades, the elaborate system of rules, expectations, and moral codes that had shaped everyday existence did not simply fade away. Instead, it became so deeply woven into daily life that many people no longer noticed it as a system at all. It functioned quietly, guiding behavior through habit rather than command. Individuals woke, worked, socialized, and rested within patterns they rarely questioned, because those patterns felt synonymous with stability itself. Society had constructed a world in which order was not just encouraged, it was assumed to be the natural condition of a well-functioning civilization. Etiquette governed even the smallest gestures, the angle at which one held a teacup, the phrasing of a greeting, the promptness of a reply to a letter. All of these carried meaning. Politeness was not casual friendliness, it was a carefully maintained language of respect that signaled reliability and self-control. People believed that such discipline prevented chaos, that shared manners allowed strangers to interact with confidence and predictability. To behave correctly was to contribute to social harmony, reinforcing a sense that everyone understood their role in maintaining balance. This attention to conduct extended into professional life. Workplaces demanded punctuality, seriousness, and loyalty, echoing the broader cultural emphasis on responsibility. Success was measured not only by achievement but by consistency of character. A person who demonstrated reliability over many years was admired as much as one who achieved distinction. The ideal worker, like the ideal citizen, embodied steadiness rather than flamboyance, perseverance rather than sudden brilliance. Public institutions reflected the same philosophy. Government offices, schools, and civic organizations prized order, documentation, and procedure. Systems of record-keeping and regulation expanded, mirroring the belief that careful management could guide society toward progress. Structure was equated with improvement. Administration was seen as a tool for moral as well as practical development. The bureaucratic habits formed during this time would later influence modern governance, leaving lasting marks on how nations organize themselves. Yet beneath this orderly exterior, the world was changing. Scientific discovery, technological innovation, and global exchange introduced ideas that sometimes strained against established traditions. New knowledge challenged older assumptions about nature, history, and humanity's place in the universe. These developments did not immediately dismantle Victorian certainty, but they introduced questions that could not easily be answered within existing frameworks. People found themselves negotiating between confidence in tradition and curiosity about the future. Urban life intensified this sense of transition. Expanding cities brought strangers into close contact, exposing individuals to perspectives different from those of their own upbringing. Markets, exhibitions, and public gatherings created opportunities to encounter unfamiliar customs and ideas. Such encounters could be exciting, but they also unsettled the carefully maintained boundaries that had long defined social identity. The very forces that fueled progress also made it harder to preserve the neat divisions and predictable behaviors of earlier decades. Family life continued to serve as the anchor of Victorian values, offering continuity amid change. Within the home, routines provided reassurance. Shared meals, evening reading, and regular visits reinforced bonds that felt timeless. Parents sought to prepare their children not only to succeed, but to uphold the moral framework they believed essential to civilization. Even as the outside world evolved, the domestic sphere remained a place where tradition was consciously preserved. At the same time, individuals began to experience a growing awareness of personal identity beyond prescribed roles. Education, literature, and public discussion encouraged reflection about ambition, creativity, and self-expression. While society still emphasized conformity, subtle shifts allowed for greater recognition of individuality. People experimented cautiously with new ideas, balancing innovation with the desire to remain respectable. This tension between continuity and change became one of the defining characteristics of the late Victorian mindset. Communication technologies accelerated the spread of information, linking communities more closely than ever before. Newspapers circulated widely, carrying stories from distant regions and exposing readers to debates about politics, science, and social reform. Knowledge that once traveled slowly could now reach thousands within days, fostering a shared awareness of global events. This expanding flow of information helped shape a more interconnected society, one increasingly conscious of its place in a rapidly changing world. Despite these transformations, the core Victorian belief in moral responsibility remained strong. Many people interpreted progress not as a rejection of tradition but as its fulfillment. They saw technological and intellectual achievements as evidence that discipline and virtue were producing tangible results. In this way, innovation was framed as an extension of established values rather than a departure from them. The age continued to celebrate hard work, self-restraint, and dedication as the engines driving advancement. Social reform movements gained momentum during this period, addressing issues such as education, labor conditions, and public health. Reformers often spoke the language of Victorian morality, arguing that improving living conditions would strengthen character and stabilize society. Their efforts demonstrated how the era's emphasis on duty could inspire change as well as preserve tradition. Even criticism of the system frequently relied on its own ethical principles, appealing to compassion, fairness, and responsibility. As the century drew closer to its end, many Victorians sensed that they were living at the threshold of a new age. The structures that had once seemed permanent were beginning to adapt to pressures of modernization. Younger generations encountered opportunities and challenges unimaginable to their grandparents, navigating a world where certainty was gradually giving way to complexity. Yet the influence of earlier values remained visible, shaping how people approached these new realities. The legacy of Victorian social rule did not disappear with the passing of the era. Its emphasis on professionalism, punctuality, and moral respectability carried forward into modern culture. Concepts such as the work ethic, the importance of reputation, and the expectation of orderly public behavior still echo those 19th century ideals. Even today, many social norms trace their origins to habits formed during this time of structured living. Looking back, the Victorian world reveals itself not simply as an age of strictness, but as a society striving to create meaning through order. Its people believed they were building a stable foundation for the future, one defined by discipline, progress, and shared values. Their rules could feel confining, yet they also offered coherence in a period of rapid transformation. Within those boundaries, millions lived complex lives filled with ambition, affection, struggle, and hope. To understand that society is to recognize the paradox at its heart. A culture determined to control change while simultaneously unleashing forces that would reshape the modern world. The careful etiquette, defined roles, and moral certainties of Victorian life did not halt progress that accompanied it, guiding its direction even as they were gradually reshaped by it. In the end, the Victorian age stands as a reminder that every society constructs frameworks to make sense of uncertainty. Its people created a world of rules not merely to restrict behavior, but to provide stability in an era of extraordinary transformation. And though time has altered those structures, their influence lingers, woven quietly into the assumptions and institutions that continue to shape life long after the age itself has passed. By the time the 19th century approached its close, the structures that had defined Victorian life for decades were no longer simply rules imposed upon society, they had become habits of thought. People carried them internally, measuring themselves and others according to standards that felt timeless even as the world around them accelerated into modernity. The pace of change was unmistakable. Cities expanded, communication quickened, and new ideas circulated with unprecedented speed. Yet many individuals still evaluated their lives through the familiar lens of duty, restraint, and respectability. For those living in this transitional moment, daily existence often felt like standing between two worlds. One world emphasized continuity, tradition, and the assurance that order created meaning. The other hinted at flexibility, possibility, and the unsettling idea that identity might not be fixed by birth or custom. These competing forces did not collide dramatically, rather they overlapped quietly, shaping decisions about work, family, and personal ambition in subtle but profound ways. A typical day still bore the imprint of long-established rhythms. Morning routines reflected discipline. Clothing chosen carefully, correspondence answered promptly, responsibilities approached with seriousness. Yet alongside these familiar actions came new influences: faster travel, broader access to information, and opportunities to encounter unfamiliar perspectives. People could read about distant events, purchase goods produced far away, or journey to places earlier generations might never have imagined visiting. Such experiences gradually widened horizons, even while social expectations encouraged caution. This widening awareness produced both excitement and anxiety. Many welcomed innovation as evidence of human progress, believing it validated decades of industrious effort. Others worried that rapid change threatened the moral framework they held dear. Conversations increasingly touched upon questions of balance: how to embrace advancement without losing stability, how to encourage individuality without dissolving shared values, how to adapt traditions so they remained relevant rather than rigid. Family life remained central to navigating these uncertainties. Within the home, older customs persisted as anchors of familiarity. Parents passed down lessons about politeness, perseverance, and integrity, hoping to equip their children with qualities that would endure regardless of external transformation. Even as technology altered workplaces and cities, the domestic sphere continued to present itself as a place of continuity, where behavior was guided by principles believed to transcend time. At the same time, younger generations began to interpret those principles differently. Where their parents saw obligation, they sometimes saw opportunity for reinterpretation. Education expanded, literacy increased, and exposure to diverse ideas encouraged reflection about personal goals. The belief that character mattered remained strong, but individuals increasingly asked how character might be expressed in a changing world. Could ambition coexist with humility? Could creativity exist within respectability? These questions did not dismantle Victorian values, but they reshaped them gradually. Public life reflected similar adjustments. Institutions that had once focused solely on maintaining order began to consider reform and accessibility. Efforts to improve living conditions, broaden education, and address social inequalities gained attention. Importantly, such changes were often justified using the very moral language that had long defined Victorian culture. Reform was framed not as rebellion but as fulfillment of ethical responsibility, suggesting that compassion and progress were natural extensions of discipline and duty. Work itself evolved in meaning. Earlier decades had emphasized labor primarily as obligation, a demonstration of diligence and moral worth. Now some individuals began to view occupation as a path toward self-definition as well as service. Professional identity carried not only responsibility but also a sense of personal achievement. This shift did not eliminate the era's strong work ethic. Instead, it layered new motivations atop familiar expectations, blending tradition with aspiration. Leisure, too, took on expanded significance. While earlier Victorian ideals had treated recreation cautiously, fearing idleness, later years saw a broader acceptance of activities pursued for enjoyment and enrichment. Reading for pleasure, attending cultural events, or traveling for curiosity rather than necessity became more common. Such pursuits hinted at a growing recognition that fulfillment involved not only productivity but also experience and reflection. Despite these developments, the shadow of judgment remained powerful. Reputation continued to shape opportunities and relationships, and many people still felt compelled to present themselves according to established codes. Yet there was a subtle shift in how those codes were interpreted. Instead of rigidly imitating past models, individuals experimented with adapting them to contemporary circumstances. Respectability no longer meant identical behavior across generations, it meant demonstrating integrity while navigating new realities. Urban environments illustrated this transformation vividly. Streets once defined by uniform routines now displayed a mixture of old and new, traditional shops beside modern enterprises, horse-drawn vehicles alongside mechanized transport, long-standing customs unfolding amid emerging innovations. Residents learned to navigate these contrasts daily, drawing upon inherited values to make sense of unfamiliar experiences. The psychological experience of living through such change was complex. Many felt pride in belonging to a society that had achieved remarkable growth, yet also sensed nostalgia for a perceived simplicity of earlier years. Memory played an important role, shaping how people interpreted progress. Stories of the past were retold with affection, emphasizing stability and clarity, even when those qualities had always been accompanied by challenge. This selective remembrance helped individuals maintain continuity as they adapted to transformation. Education increasingly emphasized preparation for a dynamic future, rather than solely preservation of tradition. Students were encouraged not only to memorize established knowledge but to apply it, analyze it, and expand upon it. This gradual shift fostered critical thinking and innovation, qualities that would define the coming century. Still, the moral undertones of Victorian instruction remained visible, reminding learners that intellectual advancement should be guided by ethical responsibility. Social interactions grew more varied as mobility increased. People encountered others from different regions, occupations, and backgrounds, creating networks that extended beyond immediate communities. These connections fostered collaboration and exchange, contributing to a more interconnected society. Yet they also required new forms of etiquette, adaptations of older manners, to suit broader, more diverse environments. As the Victorian era gave way to the 20th century, its legacy revealed itself not as a relic, but as a foundation. Many practices developed during this time structured education systems, professional standards, civic organization, and cultural emphasis on responsibility continued to shape modern life. The very qualities that later generations sometimes criticized as restrictive had also enabled remarkable achievements in science, infrastructure, and governance. What becomes clear in reflection is that Victorian society was never static, despite its reputation for rigidity. Beneath its formal exterior lay a continuous process of negotiation between continuity and change. People were not merely subjects of strict rules, they were participants in an evolving culture, adapting inherited frameworks to meet new circumstances. Their lives embodied both adherence and adjustment, demonstrating that tradition itself can be a dynamic force. The human dimension of this period is perhaps its most enduring aspect. Individuals navigated expectations with creativity, resilience, and emotion, finding ways to express affection, ambition, humor, and curiosity within structured environments. Diaries were written, friendships formed, and aspirations pursued, revealing inner lives as rich and varied as those of any other age. The outward formality often associated with Victorianism coexisted with deeply personal experiences that defy simple stereotypes. Looking back, one can see that the Victorian world did not simply vanish, it gradually transformed into the modern one. Many contemporary assumptions about professionalism, education, family responsibility, and public behavior trace their origins to habits established during that century. Even debates about balancing tradition with innovation echo the questions Victorians themselves confronted as they stood at the edge of change. To imagine living then is to imagine inhabiting a time when certainty and uncertainty walked side by side. One people trusted in established values even as they sensed those values evolving. It was an era defined not only by strictness but by aspiration, not only by hierarchy but by gradual opening, not only by rules but by the human effort to interpret them meaningfully. And so the story of Victorian social rule is not merely a tale of constraint. It is a story of adaptation, of individuals striving to reconcile order with imagination, stability with transformation. Their world reminds us that every age constructs its own framework for understanding how life should be lived, and that within those frameworks, people continually reshape the boundaries of what is possible.